So if I would make a tier list of all the bosses in this game from S to C, it would probably go as follows. Keep in mind, I like all of these bosses. None of them are any bad. It's just that there clearly is a certain range in quality between them, and that's why I think a tier list is especially helpful for comparing them to one another. So, we get to the first boss, which is the Root Pack. So, we've got Cell Sputter the potato, Ollie Bulb the onion in phase 2, and we got Chauncey Chintenay the carrot in the last phase. I think this boss in general is like a very great overall gameplay introduction. The potato is shooting these straight shooting projectiles, these kind of like dirt blobs. And he's also very angry looking, which I also very like. He's like an angry potato. And yeah, this first phase is pretty fun because it's very straightforward and it does provide kind of a challenge with, you know, the increasing speed of the projectiles he spits at you. And you can also parry the like snake things. It's a great first challenge for sure. And then we get to the second phase, which is Ollie Bulb, the onion guy. And yeah, he just has these falling tears as projectiles that he's trying to hit you with. I mean, he doesn't even seem like he wants to fight you. And actually, if you decide not to fight him, as soon as this phase starts, he will actually just disappear. And the next phase with the carrot will start, which is a pretty nice little detail because, you know, it kind of incorporates his personality into the gameplay. And yes, obviously makes perfect sense that he's crying because, you know, he's an onion. And then we have the final phase, Chauncey Chintenay as the carrot. The most challenging part of this phase is just dealing with these chasing projectiles, you know, these baby carrots, while he's shooting this blast of hypnotic rings at you. And he looks pretty sinister and kind of malicious. He definitely looks the most villainous out of the bunch. And I also like that these three bosses have also their very distinct personalities. You know, the potato is angry, the onion is obviously scared and, you know, cries, and the carrot is just evil. I think this one is my personal favorite out of the three, just because it's the most challenging and it also gives you the most room to move around. The boss doesn't really occupy a set space in the arena or the stage itself, so you can move around freely and, you know, dodge all the different projectiles. Yeah, this boss is alright. It's a great first boss for sure, and I really enjoy the overall theme. I also think the background looks great, but these three are definitely more on the lower side, looking at all the bosses. So, the Root Pack, we put the Root Pack in B tier. So, next up we got Goupy le Grand, or Goupy le Grande, whatever. Now, this is by far one of the oddest bosses in my opinion. He's like so weird and goofy. When me and my friend first fought this guy, we were so weirded out by the funny faces he was making. It was pretty funny. This guy is probably the easiest boss in the entire game. His moves are highly predictable and you only need to pay attention to that one attack where he like inflates himself and covers basically half of the screen. Now the last phase is actually the best one, and it's pretty fun honestly. You fight his gravestone after beating him, which is a pretty charming idea. And it also looks super funny with his face on the actual gravestone, and yeah, it's just a very cute idea. This is definitely the highlight of the battle. Also, one other thing, I also love the little intro animation he does, where he like tips his head. Now, the first time we got to the last phase, me and my friend, we were like panicking because the gravestone is in the background of the fight, and it only can hit you when it stops and then slams down at the player. But for some reason we thought that it had a constant hitbox, and when it was going like left to right, I still remember we were like panicking because we thought, holy crap, how are we supposed to go about this? It's just going left and right and we're going to get hit, holy shit. Yeah, this phase isn't actually too hard. You just need to pay attention to when it stops and then dash out of the way and then just keep hitting him until he dies. I think the last phase is actually the least challenging, although I think it's the most creative, aesthetically and visually, but in general, this boss, Goupy le Grand, kinda like the least creative boss fight in terms of moveset and design. The fight is pretty easy, you know, there's not a whole lot of challenge going on. I mean, it's still challenging, there's some challenge to it, especially for new players, but yeah, in terms of design, he's not really got much going for it, except of course the last phase, but that's also kind of watered down because it's so quick and it's pretty easy to deal with. Guppy the Grand, yeah, C tier. Not the best one. Next up are Ribby and Rogues. These guys are awesome. The first time we fought them and we saw the background and the design of the two frogs, we were like, alright, this game will be sick as hell. I love the crowd of flies, like sitting at the table and cheering in the background. This is one of my favorite backgrounds, I think. And there are definite references to Street Fighter in this fight. You know, the boxing gloves, the energy blasts, and also later in the third phase with the slot machine you got the tigers. I think it's super cool how they work together and how the green frog temporarily goes to the left side. And then the yellow one does this turbine air blow attack, while the other one is spawning these spacey looking colorful balls that bounce off the walls. It's super cool. And in the next stage, the yellow frog swallows the green one and then they turn into a freaking slot machine, which is so damn creative. When we saw that, we were like, holy crap. What the heck? I was just so much more hyped for what's to come because I thought, okay, this is only the third boss and this much creative stuff is already happening? This game will be freaking amazing. And I wasn't wrong. This is the first pretty challenging fight, I think. And overall, I think it's the best one so far. And I feel pretty confident saying that this one is probably one of the better fights in the game. Great colors, great design, great background, great music as well. And yeah, the last phase is just freaking super creative and awesome. I think it's also my favorite phase out of the whole fight. Ruby and Rogues, we're going to put at A tier. Next, we get to Hilderberg, the first plane fight. This one is also very, very cool. It's a super charming design. I think the laughing ha attack she throws at you is super awesome. And she has a very strong 1930s aesthetic with, you know, the haircut and all that. In her first phase, she repeatedly transforms into like different zodiac signs, like Taurus, Gemini, and Sagittarius? I don't know. And before she transforms herself, there's like this visual cue where the actual star alignments of the zodiac sign she's going to transform into is shown on screen with these like cartoon stars, which is a super cool addition. And yeah, it's just these fine little touches all over the game that just enhance the experience to such an overwhelming degree. And the fact that in the third phase she transforms into this freaky alien looking moon with these UFOs flying around, it's so unexpected and very stylized and super awesome. Like the sense of scale from this little plane thingy where she's riding her bike to this like cosmic monstrosity it's super cool. And this is the first point where I realized, man, these boss designs are kind of creepy. I mean, this moon phase looks pretty terrifying, honestly. And there are even some, like I said, cosmic horror elements in some of these boss fights. I feel like this is the most challenging boss so far. It might be because, you know, the plane format kind of threw me off and that's why the first boss is always maybe a little harder. But yeah, the last phase is super difficult, I think. And it actually lasts for quite some time, so she tanks quite some damage in this phase. And yeah, I just remember it being the hardest boss that we fought up until this point. And the soundtrack is also pretty cool. Yeah, it's playful, it's upbeat, it's got a great pace to it. Just a great fight overall. Hildeberg? A tier for sure. Now, we get to the final boss of Inkwell Isle 1, which is Cagney Carnation. And this is easily my favorite design out of Inkwell Isle 1. So cool. At first, in the intro animation, it looks super cute and harmless, and then it like turns into this monster where it screams at you and then starts doing this little hand dance. This was so funny when I first saw it. I laughed my ass off at this point. I absolutely love the animation of this dance. It's so funny where he's going like back and forth with his hands. It's super funny. I really adore it. And when me and my friend first fought this boss, I wasn't even trying to win because I just saw this animation of Cagney doing this dance and I thought, man, this is so awesome. I just wanted to see it over and over. I love the colors on this one. It's certainly a very unique design and definitely one of the first ones that pop into my head when I think about Cuphead. For new players, this will most likely present the biggest challenge up to this point. It certainly was for us. You've got a lot of different projectiles that he throws at you, the blue boomerang thing, the plant seed mouth thingies that like grow out of the plants and start chasing you around. Yeah, there's many different things you'll have to pay attention to simultaneously. The last phase is also pretty awesome. Both his eyes and mouth become even bigger, and his smile becomes even more monstrous. This last phase is a little easier in my opinion, because there are overall less things to account for, and his hitbox is larger, so you're pretty much landing every shot, as long as it's aimed to the right. Yeah, just all the different animations for this guy are so extra and fun to look at, and he genuinely seems to be enjoying this fight. Even if it might be a kind of malicious enjoyment, if you want to say so. Let's say I wanted to get people into the game and introduce them by just having them play one boss fight, and only one. I would probably choose this one. Yes, it might be more challenging than the previous ones, and they might die over and over again, but it's so fun and iconic to me. The difficulty is great overall. It's definitely challenging, but it's still doable, and the background is great, the colors are great. I really like the yellow, orange, green color combination of Cagney's design, and the stage with the 3 platforms. There's just so much creative and quality stuff in this fight. And it's the best one so far. It's the best one out of Inkwell Isle for sure. And also, his death animation is pretty scary looking, with the lifeless, empty eyes staring at the sky, and his tongue sticking out, and like, yeah, it looks kind of creepy. And also, how could I forget to mention the amazing soundtrack. This boss has a super awesome musical track to it. What stands out the most to me about the track is the flute, obviously. It's super prominent, and this adds even more to the overall uniqueness of this fight. So yeah, awesome fight, really love it. One of the best in the whole game actually. Cagney Carnation, this one is an S. This one is a strong S. Now we get to a very big hitter, Baroness Bonbon. So this is easily one of the best bosses in terms of pure aesthetics and design. So damn creative and pleasing to look at. It's, the pink, all the colors, the theme with the candies and stuff. It's just beautiful. Everything in this fight is beautiful. Her intro animation is really great, I think. She slices off her head and the head spins and lands back on her as she gets pulled into the castle by a candy cane, and then she like stands on top of the castle. I love the castle as well, with the gate being its mouth, sort of, where her goons come out of to fight you. I also really admire the animation of the candy castle every time it opens its gate mouth, with like its eyes, spinning around and stuff. Yeah, it's just great. And another nice thing is her ice cone princess hat. It's also just a very nice little detail. And just her design alone is like stellar. And with all the other stuff this boss kind of presents, it's impressive, it's super impressive. The whole aesthetic of this fight, also taking the background into account, and with, the candy theme, it's just phenomenal. It's so beautiful, and it's certainly one of the most iconic looks out of all of the bosses. Now, the first phases of this fight are made up of you fighting 3 out of a total of 5 different mini-bosses. So there are 5 mini-bosses or goons of Baroness Bonbon in total, and yeah, you randomly fight 3 of those in a row. I think all of them are pretty cool. I think the best ones are the like candy machine with its like flimsy floppy legs going all over the place, and his aggressive like face. It's pretty cool. And second, the flying waffle. And the flying waffle I think is actually the most challenging one of all of these. And the final phase is super awesome. So you basically fight her castle, which has now grown arms and starts dragging itself towards you, and it gets super angry at you. Meanwhile, Baroness Bonbon throws her head at you, that like spins around and follows you. It's pretty cool. And the last phase is actually pretty freaking challenging. I think it's the most challenging part of this whole fight, because there's almost just one platform for you to stand on. You don't have a lot of room to kind of maneuver around. You also have to account for these rolling candy wheels on the ground that you can parry. It's the hardest part of the boss for sure, and there's a lot you have to deal with. Yeah, pretty cool. Although this last phase definitely is kind of difficult, I don't think she ranks that high in terms of difficulty compared to all of the other bosses, especially ones that we will cover a bit later. Baroness Bonbon, also S. So, next we got one of my favorites, Jimmy the Great. This is another amazing boss fight. I think it's easily under the top 3 for most fun and entertaining boss fights. And it's also one of the most creative in terms of design and aesthetic. His intro animation is great as well. He inhales and blows out like a cup with a frowning face on it and 2 X's as its eyes. It's a pretty short and minimalist kind of intro animation, but it's really great. And I also really adore the very distinct background 360 shot of this desert village. It's kind of like an old vintage recording, which I also find pretty cool. In the first phase, there's one attack where he shoots out his face as a cloud, and then he gets a new face. And this animation also looks super fun. It's pretty cool. I especially like the color scheme of his design, with the turquoise clothes and the bright orange of his skin. It really goes well together, and it makes his whole appearance very eye-popping. Another just tiny little touch I really enjoy are the little genie lamps on his feet that kind of are his shoes. I just think it looks kind of ridiculous, but in a very good way. Moving on to the second phase, it's super different from the first, because you don't even really fight him. It's like a small mini-level within the boss fight itself. And you've got these menacingly laughing parts of the columns that look at you and that you can destroy to fly through. And if you pay close attention, you can actually tell that Jimmy has actually transformed himself into this mini-level, because the spinning columns have his body painted on them, and like I said, his face on them as well. And I didn't even notice that the first 2 playthroughs, because I think I was just too distracted of how cool and fun this second phase is, because I really like it, and it's super varied, and yeah, I really enjoy it. And then in the next phase, which is also super awesome, you fight this cosmic golden sarcophagus that opens and reveals this weirdly formed version of the boss. It's just like this orange blob that is doing the body wave, and you've got these mummy ghosts flying at you that come out of, I think, the universe, you can see in the inside of the sarcophagus. And then this weird orange creature design shoots out these miniature Saturn projectiles at you out of his eyes. And this phase is super trippy. I was super caught off guard by how weird this phase was and all the different design choices they made in this one. And as soon as you beat this phase, which is another thing I find super awesome, is that the sarcophagus closes, turns around, and then he's got this very sad face with a tear, and he just bounces off to the right. It's so good. It's such a nice little detail. It's a very great sense of humor, and I think what makes this even more funny are the bouncing sounds that the sarcophagus makes when it bounces off. It's just a perfect little cute animation. And then there's the next phase, where at the start he scans your body and then creates a marionette version of Cuphead. And at this point, I think I can say that this might just be the most creative boss fight out of all of the bosses in terms of just pure design. Although, I'm not quite sure. We'll see as we move forward, but yeah, just super cool. The Cuphead marionette even shoots your normal blue projectiles that you get at the start at you. It's so freaking good. It's so creative. It's just super fun. And there's actually a little Easter egg or a little secret where as soon as the boss transitions into this phase and starts scanning you, you can actually shrink yourself to this mini version of the plane, and then the marionette will be a very small version of Cuphead. And I think this little puppet is then actually part of the final phase. So you can essentially skip a phase by shrinking yourself into this mini plane, which I think is a very cool addition, and I never thought of trying that myself. But yeah, it's pretty cool. So moving on to the last phase. I think this is in a way similar to the Hilda Berg fight, where the scale is just amped up to 11 in the last phase. Because Jimmy gets super huge, and you have these golden flying pyramids that shoot these purple laser beams out of their eye. Yeah, just very cool, trippy stuff. A super nice conclusion to this fight. And yeah, it's another reason why I really enjoy this fight so much. And another reason why I also think I really enjoy this fight in particular is that Jimmy is just so damn likable. He always smiles at you, and he's always got this playful attitude while fighting you. It seems just like he's enjoying this fight and this kind of competition almost. And yeah, this is just, it's super wholesome. It's very engaging. and I think it makes the fight even cooler. And yeah, I think he actually might be my favorite boss, but I'm not that sure right now. I think there's one other boss that we'll get to later that probably takes the cake. Jimmy the Great. S as well. So next we got Beppy the Clown. Man, this guy, I think this might be the hardest boss up until this point. He was super tough in the first playthrough especially, and even now he's still a pretty tough fight. His design is very creepy, and it gets even more and more creepy as the fight goes on. The background, depicting, you know, the circus and all the other park attractions, is pretty cool. Aesthetically, it's easily the best background so far, and it even plays an important role in the boss fight itself. The first phase of Beppy, I think, is very funny and goofy. He just awkwardly goes back and forth in this circus cart, or whatever you call that thing. It's even got a face, which is always a plus. Yeah, just Beppy's facial expressions while clumsily driving the cart, they're just too good. It's very funny. The floating ducks at the top are also pretty fun, and how they drop like these burning light bulbs. They obviously fit very well with the whole circus theme. And at the end he falls off, and then in the second phase he becomes this giant evil looking balloon machine. This is my favorite part out of the whole boss fight. Aesthetically, I think it's just a super cool design. It's very creative, and yeah, I pretty much just like everything in this game. But yeah, and you know, with all the balloons and the balloon machine obviously fitting very well with the circus theme, it's just great. And now you have also a very cool addition, which is the roller coaster that sometimes rides across the screen and that you need to account for. What's very cool about this is that you can actually look in the background and actually predict when it's about to drive across the boss stage. Yeah, I love the evil, beastly face it has on the front. I also really like the passengers, these yellow passengers that are wearing these paper bags with like a creepy smiling face drawn on them. This fight, to me, feels especially 1930s animation-esque, mainly because of the clown and the circus aesthetic and all that. This is also, I'd say, one of the most iconic boss designs of Cuphead. Yeah, it's just a very visually memorable boss. So in the next phase, he starts riding this green, cracked up looking horse hanging from the ceiling, and it's vomiting these horseshoes that come out in an S shape, while you also have the roller coaster giving you a lot of trouble. And then you've got the last phase. And again, you've got that sense of scale. He turns into this super huge, like, chaeroplane. He looks even more creepy, and in the transition, you can actually hear a very creepy laugh as well, right before he emerges from the bottom. And yeah, the roller coaster is still doing his thing, giving you a lot of trouble. But this last phase isn't actually too difficult in comparison. It's only kind of challenging because at this point, you probably only have like one hit point left, or maybe two. And so that's why, you know, the last phase obviously is always a little more panicking. It's more that this specific boss, I think, is just very challenging through and through. So there isn't actually one specific phase that is way more challenging than the others. This is overall a very well-rounded boss in terms of difficulty. The difficulty kind of stays the same throughout all of the phases. But yeah, super amazing boss with a super cool and iconic design. I also think the soundtrack of this fight is especially well done. Yeah, it makes great effort to sort of give you that circus and clown theme park kind of vibe. Beppy the Clown? A tier. Up next, we've got Wally Warbles. Now, this guy isn't as great as the last couple of bosses we talked about, but he's still pretty cool. I do like his design. He's like a bird that got too big for his own birdhouse, which is pretty funny, I think. The first phase is pretty alright. The coolest things for me are the cute little birds that each have a big nail taped to their bodies. I think that's super cute, it's a very nice design. And you've got the one attack where he turns his head into a hand, and this hand shoots out 3 bullets out of its fingers. I also think that's kind of cool. The next phase is very fun, I think. It's the first real instance of classic, like, bullet hell, I guess, in Cuphead, with the feathers being shot in every direction. The best way to deal with this phase is just to always look at your avatar, which makes it much easier to avoid the feathers. And I really enjoy this phase because it truly makes you focus on one single thing. And it's also something that we haven't seen up until this point. In the next phase, you fight, I guess, Wally Warbles Jr., and I really hate this phase. I truly despise it. Especially in the 100% completion run, this phase was an absolute nightmare to deal with, because it's pretty hard not to get hit by these spiky egg balls that float around the guy. Yeah, it's just a pretty annoying phase overall. And I kind of can see some inspirations to, like, I guess Bowser Jr., because he does kind of look like him in a way. But aside from maybe the idea, I don't think there's anything good about this. I personally really don't like it. The last phase is the coolest one in terms of just sheer design and also the, I guess, concept. You've got like these cute little emergency nurse birds holding up the, at this point, totally beat up boss. You can see he's got, you know, some bandages on him and he's just super wrecked. And the boss attacks you by, one, turning his head into a trash can and spitting trash at you, which I find is just a very crazy but also pretty cool idea. I think it works very well. And second, which is even cooler in my opinion, he pops out like his heart and it spits some projectiles at you. So the heart has like a small mouth and yeah, it just spits some projectiles at you. I also love the way this boss is just super angry at the player all the time. Like, this guy truly despises Cuphead, and even as he's dying, he actively hurts himself in order to kill you. And it's so fun because, like, Cuphead and Mugman are always smiling, and then you have this super pissed off bird who just wants to completely destroy you. Still, besides that, I'd say he doesn't count to the greater bosses of the game. Although the fight is pretty challenging, he's maybe on the same level as Cagney Carnation or Baroness Bonbon. Pretty nice fight, not that special, not that great, but still very cool. Wally Warbles, we're gonna put him in B tier. So next up we have Grim Matchstick. This guy is tough. He's definitely one of the most challenging bosses in the game. His design is very classic, you know, it's your typical green fire-spitting fairy tale dragon. It's very simple, but it's much appreciated. You know, we've got all these super ridiculous designs. I think it kind of serves the game very well, or this boss in particular, that this design is more toned down and it's kind of more minimalist in a way. I really enjoy the fact that he turns towards the camera as he like howls at the player, kind of breaking the fourth wall, which I think is a very neat little idea. The first phase is actually pretty easy, with, you know, the fireballs flying in this S shape and the hypnotic ring beams that he fires at you that you can partially parry. He also attacks you with his tail, but yeah, it's all pretty simple stuff, honestly. The only true thing making this a bit challenging is the boss stage itself being fully made out of these cloud platforms. So there's no actual ground to stand on, it's just these cloud platforms, basically. The next phase is much more difficult, I think, but it's also much more enjoyable for it. These little fire guys that, you know, walk across the dragon's tongue and jump at you are a pain in the ass to deal with. But it's also a very good challenge, and there's actually a very noticeable audio cue so that you can react to it, and it's all very well communicated. It's still tough though, because, you know, reacting to these jumps, especially on these platforms, isn't always that easy. I also really like how, you know, his tongue gets super long and, you know, the little fire guys basically come out of his mouth and they are like enjoying themselves. It's pretty cool stuff. Now the third phase is probably the hardest out of all bosses so far. He grows 2 more heads, which I personally find super cool because, fun fact, when I was younger, I always loved multi-headed dragons for some reason. I thought they looked super cool and much cooler than just a dragon with 1 head. So I always wanted toys with dragons that had like 2 or more heads, and the more heads the better essentially. I was just obsessed with multi-headed dragons. I also like the drastic weather change to a very heavy and rainy storm, which fits very well with the, you know, amped up difficulty. The toughest thing about this phase are the fire projectiles, that when you fire at them, create even more projectiles themselves, which is a true nightmare to deal with. And whilst that's happening, you have to also watch out for the middle head that sometimes turns into a flamethrower and like shoots a huge fire blast at you. The last phase also tanks a lot of damage in general, which makes it even more of a sweat and stress inducing experience, because it lasts very long and you're just hoping that it finally will be over, because you just don't want to deal with all of the stuff You also constantly have to keep moving from the lower clouds to the upper ones, and you cannot stay in the middle because of the flame attack. And because you need to maneuver and change positions so often and so quickly, you can barely focus on dealing a lot of damage, which really tests both your timing and your patience. So this phase, very challenging, very tough, pretty cool design. I especially like the fact that the middle head turns into like a flamethrower. I think that's just a pretty clever idea. Yeah, just a great challenge. We easily had to try this guy like, I think 40 or 50 times. I'm not sure, but it was very difficult. It was truly, truly difficult. Now, moving on to the 2 run and gun levels of the Inkwell Isle 2. Grim Matchstick? Not quite sure, but I think he's just not good enough for A tier. Now we move on to Inkwell Isle 3, starting with Rumor Honeybottoms. This was a true nightmare of a boss fight, let me tell you. She's easily harder than Beppy the Clown or the Dragon for me, so she's the hardest boss in the game so far. But besides the challenge, this boss fight is pretty awesome. I love the intro animation, where she just knocks her fork and knife together, like she wants to eat you, and then she sends in the police bee to fight you first. This first phase is honestly so fun to me. I love the design of the police bee, and the way he says, boy, 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 or whatever he says. It's super funny. I really adore his look. Aesthetically, this boss is very top-notch. The background depicting these different layers and rooms of the worker bees, and like the shelves and the desks, it's super cute and also a very nice touch. You know, you've got that little beehive with all the worker bees, and makes sense because they're working. It's desk and shelf and stuff. It's a workspace. The second phase gets pretty challenging when she summons these purple balls or the shooting and spinning triangles, which thankfully can be parried, because that would be an absolute nightmare otherwise. And in between these parts, she sometimes drops down in the middle as a wrecking ball, you could call it, and then she spits out these rockets. And whilst dealing with all these projectiles and stuff, the player needs to constantly jump up to the next platforms, because the screen is constantly moving up. So you don't want to be, stuck at the bottom and then get hit. The animation she does when entering the final phase is also pretty cool, I think. With her spellbook transforming herself into an airplane. The last phase isn't all that difficult once you get the hang of it. There is a very clear visual cue for her seesaw arm attack, and yeah, it's telegraphed very well. And her death animation is also pretty funny, where she rapidly flaps her plane wings and her head spins and spins. Yeah, it's a very nice boss and a very well executed theme. I also really like the whole yellow color theme, and the background is also great, and you've got like honey dripping everywhere from the sides. It's a very well executed boss. Rumor Honeybottoms, this one's going into A. Next up we got Captain Brinybeard, and compared to the other ones, this is a much easier fight. Still challenging, but definitely a less stress-inducing experience. And you've also dramatically improved your skills at this point, which also doesn't hurt. I really adore his absolutely hilarious idle animation. It almost looks like he's imitating a chicken, but in more of a crab kind of way, if you know what I mean. It's just pretty funny to look at. This guy has got some pretty creative attacks. He pulls out this poor and very sad looking squid that shoots these tiny balls at you. There's the barrel with eyes and a mouth that constantly dangles from the ceiling and crushes down at the player. The barrel is a very cool idea in particular because it's constantly present in the fight, so you always have to account for it while also managing all of the other parts of the fight. I also really like the way the shark attacks you and then just awkwardly uses his flappers to move its giant body off the ground back into the water. The purple squid with the ink bottle spraying ink all over the place is also really cool. They really did everything they could with the pirate and sea theme, and they pulled it off pretty well in my opinion. And then there's the final phase, where the ship just gets super angry and annoyed of its own captain, throws off Captain Brinybeard and decides to finish the job itself. This is not a very challenging phase, but it's still a lot of fun. The highlight, of course, being the giant pink laser beam that shoots out not of the ship's mouth, actually, but the mouth of its palette, which also has a face. And that's just a very strange and weird design choice, and I love it. It's just super ridiculous, and I can imagine that they just came up with this like on the spot and said, hey, why not just make this little pellet guy with the with this face and this high-pitched voice that just blasts this huge laser. Captain Brinybeard? B tier. Now next we have Werner Verman, or Werner Verman, whatever. And like most of the other ones, this boss is pretty awesome. Especially this one is such a cool concept for a character, I think. The mouse is in his little like moving can, which he has modified with various different weapons in order to fight you. His whole demeanor is also very like competitive and soldier-like, I think. He often salutes, and when he does his charging attack, you can clearly see some like military behavior in him. And I think that also fits very well with all the, you know, weapons and tools he's constructed to fight you. I also love his little metal hat and the tiny cigar between his teeth. And in these first phases, you can see the cat in the background, peeking through a hole in the wall. And I'm pretty sure this is a Tom and Jerry reference, just because the cat's color scheme is very, very similar to Tom's. But anyhow, then the second phase starts, and ooh boy, this phase is pretty challenging. There's so much stuff you have to keep track of. Werner in the middle going up and down with his like machine driving thing, and then he shoots fire out of his machine on both sides of the screen, while you also have to deal with the different seesaws popping in from the sides. Yeah, there's just a lot to deal with. You need to be at the right spot at the right time, or else you're pretty much fucked. And this is way tougher in co-op mode, because you have two lunatics jumping and dodging around. This phase gave me the most trouble in my 100% run. And then you have the final phase where, you know, the cat pops out of the background, swallows Werner, and then starts fighting you. And this phase is so much easier than the second one. It might even be easier than the first one. There's this one attack where the cat spawns like these two mouse ghosts that throw some balls at you that you can also parry. And another great death animation where it's revealed that actually the cat was just a robot that the mouse built and was controlling the entire time. And yeah, it's all about those fine little details and the stuff that doesn't need to be there, but makes the bosses just so much better. Werner Verman, I do like him a lot. There's a lot of great stuff in this fight, but I think I'm going to go with B tier. Next up we have Carla Maria. Now here we go. This is the game's #1 waifu character, and this is another super iconic character for Cuphead. It's an awesome design that's kind of a mixture between like Medusa and a mermaid, but the Medusa part just comes in the later phases. So she just starts off as a mermaid and then gradually transforms into a more monster-fight version. I really like her color combination. The pink of her hair and the turquoise and green make for a very eye-popping aesthetic. And the background with, you know, the very orangey tinted clouds is also very nice to look at. I also think it's pretty awesome that her hair is actually just an octopus that she put on her head. Now, starting off with the first phase, there are many enemies and attacks she's got at her disposal. And it makes this phase super fun and fresh no matter how long you play it. There are these two different big fishes she pulls out that shoot at you. There's the little turtle guy with a cute hat and his macho boxing stance. And there's also the seahorse that spits out like a huge water jet. And of course also the globefishes that move up the screen and that you have to avoid. Yeah, super engaging first phase. Pretty varied in pretty much every aspect. It's just a very entertaining first phase. So in the next phase, many electric eels start popping up around her, and they bite at her and then through the electricity transform her into like a very monster-fight version of herself that kind of resembles Medusa, and the squid on her head turns into snake heads. And this phase is a bit more simple because there's less overall stuff to deal with, but it's still pretty challenging because these eels fire many projectiles at you and Carla Maria sometimes turns you into stone. And that's another awesome thing about this fight. When you get frozen, you have to button mash the shit out of your controller to get free. And you also have to do it very quick, because if you don't, you might get hit by the projectiles the eels spit at you. And it was also a very great choice to make the eels attackable, so you can kind of manage the level of bullets and projectiles you'll have to deal with in this phase. Of course there's a trade-off, because every damage dealt to the eels is damage not dealt to the boss. And then there's the last phase, where you just fight her floating head, whilst flying through a cave. And the most challenging thing about this part is having to maneuver around the environmental obstacles, while also making sure that you don't get hit by her, like, petrifying spell. It's not super tough, but the fight in general is much more enjoyable than it is challenging, I feel. I think this last phase is still a little bit more challenging than the first two. And one last thing I just have to point out, because I think it's so awesome, is her death animation, where she just closes her eyes, like looks away in a very sad manner, and then one of the snakes on her head plays a small violin with its mouth. It's so brilliant, it's so cool to look at. Probably one of, if not my favorite death animation out of all the bosses. This is just a great sense of humor. Kala Maria, very strong A tier. Next up, we have a very cool boss, which is Dr. Cal's robot. This one also fits into the category of most challenging bosses in the game. And aesthetically speaking, this fight feels very different to the other ones to me. It might just be the fact that you're fighting a full-on robot, plus the industrial sci-fi background, but I think this is pretty great, honestly. I think this is another contender for best background. I just love the harsh, redly tinted sky, the rubble and trash. You're basically fighting him in like a large-scale garbage dump of this super dope-looking sci-fi city. It's just a very cool background. The robot's design does kind of remind me of the Iron Giant, and I would not be surprised if that was one of their inspirations. So the first phase is the coolest, and I think also the hardest one out of all three. There's so much stuff you have to keep on your radar. The boss always attacks you with 3 different weapons or projectiles. At the top you have that laser thing, in the middle it's that laser barrier that you can turn off by parrying, and at the bottom there are these flying little spaceships that go up the screen from side to side. And these ones in particular are a nightmare to deal with. There's so much creative stuff just in this first phase alone. And what's great is that the player can sort of decide how this first phase is going to develop. Because depending on which of these weapons you attack and destroy first, this fight can go very differently. The boss actually starts changing its attacks when one of his tools is destroyed, and starts to fight in a very different manner. For example, when you destroy his little laser gun at the top, he gets super angry and starts shooting screws, screw nuts and other things out of his mouth. Or when you destroy the gate of the spaceships at the bottom, he starts shooting these black bombs that chase after you. And what's very cool is that when you destroy these bombs, their explosion looks like a skull version of Dr. Cal's head, which is just super cool. And then there's also the magnet hindering your movement from time to time, like he pops out from behind. And these 2 robot arms that also pop up from behind and shoot like these blue laser balls. Honestly, this phase is so well put together. It's very tough, but it's so fun because there's so much stuff to deal with. This guy uses like so many different techniques and weapons to kill you. It's just very cool. Now the second phase is just the robot's flying head that you need to fight, while these stupid black bombs are following you around all the time. This can get very annoying because on one hand, these bombs have a pretty large hitbox when they explode, so you need to be very careful, and on the other hand, the head is just sporadically on screen, and just for a very short period of time. And that's the only time when you can actually deal damage to it. The best way to deal with this phase, actually, is to save up your super, and then use it to hit as many of the black bombs as you can, while also hitting the robot head. And when I found out this strategy for myself, it made it so much easier, and this phase was over in like maybe 20 seconds or so, because yeah, it was just super easy to deal with and much less stressful. And the last phase is the doctor himself piloting the robot head, while absolutely filling the screen with these red and blue crystals. This is just straight up bullet hell, and just like the Wally Wobbles second phase, I really like this last phase. Not as much as the first, definitely not as much as the first, but way more than the second phase. The challenging part of this phase is obviously trying not to get hit, while also avoiding these electric walls that pop up from the top and bottom. And this phase takes a lot of time, so he tanks a lot of damage. But I think this is a very good thing. Like I said before, I really enjoy the deep focus these bullet hell phases force you in, and with every passing second, it makes you focus even harder, because you know that you're getting closer and closer to victory. You just have to focus, not get hit, avoid the walls, and you'll beat the boss. Yeah, this is one of the best bosses in the game. Again, the first phase is so freaking amazing and fun, it's super entertaining, gameplay-wise and design-wise. it's certainly up there with the best bosses in the game. Dr. Kell's robot, I was thinking of putting him in S, but upon further inspection, I'll put him in A tier. So next up, there's Sally's stage play. And I don't feel too strong about this one, although I have to admit that I admire the stage play concept. With all the silhouettes of the crowd clapping and cheering in the foreground, it's like the fight with her is part of the play itself. And the humor in this fight is definitely up there. I especially like the fiancé of Sally with his tall head completely freaking out in the background. And then there's also the priest, who's just so confused and totally overwhelmed with his situation, looking super worried and clueless about what to do. It's just, yeah, great humor. And I also really like the whole idea of the first phase being her marriage day, and the second phase being her time as a new mother with a baby. This fight also greatly embodies the 1930s aesthetic to me. Yeah, in that regard it's pretty good. Actually, the more I think about it, the more stuff I find in it that I really like. The first phase is very basic. There's not a whole lot of spice to it. The coolest thing about it to me is Sally's design itself and her like disappearing animation, where her umbrella basically eats her, but otherwise her attacks aren't that challenging or interesting, I'd say. They're pretty straightforward, so it's kind of mediocre in that regard. Not in general, just compared to the rest of the game. You know, the boss is still awesome, but it's just that the other bosses are just a little better. I think the second phase is more challenging and also more enjoyable. The babies dropping the milk bottles are very annoying but also pretty cute. And there's also the fiancé, now as a dad, popping up in the background, still being very anxious and worried. Yeah, he's just a great character. I really like that they put him in the background. And then we get to the third phase, and also the coolest one, where she turns into this evil looking demigod figure with the wings and all that, hanging from the ceiling on strings. And you've also got the very cute wave prop moving across the screen, and the small lighting strikes also on strings. Yeah, just very great stuff in this phase. And then we get to the final phase, and here lies probably my only point of contention that is even worth mentioning about this game. This phase isn't all that great. She basically becomes an angel that just hovers at the top of the screen, moving from left to right, while her umbrella is on the ground, just spinning and following you. And you have some roses falling down at you, which I somewhat like, you know. It makes sense for the end of the stage play, so it's pretty good in terms of fitting with the theme. But yeah, this phase is over very quickly, and that's also true for the third phase. And that's why what I think what they should have done is just extend the third phase and maybe include the falling roses in that as well, maybe towards the second half or so, and just completely skip this final phase. I don't really think it's all that necessary. I think it doesn't really add anything to the boss. If anything, it makes it feel kind of more, I guess, clumsy in a way. It's not a huge issue, but yeah, Sally stage play. Although the theme and its execution, aesthetically speaking, are pretty neat, I'd put her at the lower end of the boss fights. Sally stage play? C tier. And now, we get to the Phantom Express. This one is my absolute favorite boss of the entire game. Amazing Halloween concept, so much variety, great level of difficulty, super creative gameplay mechanics. Let's just go one by one. I think the idea of controlling a platform that you can move across the stage with by parrying its wheels on the edges is super cool, and it adds an extra dimension and an extra layer of strategy to the fight. And like the idea that you work your way from the back to the front of the train while fighting the different bosses within the train until you fight the train itself in the end, it's just a very awesome idea. So the first phase, we've got this super cool eyeless ghost boss, probably the coolest design out of all of the bosses in this fight. And he's got eyes in the palms of his hands, like that one creature in Pan's Labyrinth. Next, you have the huge conductor skeleton that pops out of the top of the wagon with his two hands crushing down at the player whenever they pop up. And now, the controllable platform really comes into play. You need to pay attention to where his head pops out and move the rail platform accordingly so you don't get hit by his gigantic hands. And another awesome part of this fight are these cute little flying Halloween pumpkins that drop these pink blocks that you can parry. They might be candy, I'm not sure. And you can either hit them or let them just drop the blocks on the edge of the platform, making the platform move. So these little guys can actually be helpful to you in the right situation, or they can make the boss harder. The skeleton guy is pretty cool, but compared to the other bosses in this fight, I think he's the least interesting one. But he does remind me a lot of the old spooky scary skeleton animation, so that's pretty cool. Then in the next phase, you fight these two circle monsters with horrible dental hygiene, by the way, one on the left and one on the right side. And here it's also super important to keep the platform moving to avoid getting hit by them vomiting lightning blasts at you. Plus, you now have these black chimneys in the middle wagon that shoot out these ghosts that follow the player, and upon being hit, drop a parryable gumball of sorts, similar to the flying pumpkins before, although they don't specifically target the wheels on the edge of the platform. This phase actually takes a while to complete. These guys do tank a lot of damage, and you have to kill both of them individually, which, you know, adds another layer of difficulty. But then we get to the final phase, the train himself. And this is definitely the hardest phase of the entire fight. First of all, the projectiles it fires at you have a pretty chaotic pattern to them. These little fire sparkles, coupled with the flaming bone rings, do put up a reasonable challenge, especially in combination. And then you can only damage the boss if you manage to parry the light bulb at the end of its tail, and then the engine opens, revealing its burning heart, which is just an amazing design choice, honestly. The train itself and the first ghost boss are super awesomely designed. Oh, and the background in this fight, with the dark and spooky forest and some gravestones, it's also very nice. You know, it fits the whole spooky Halloween theme. Yeah, I absolutely adore this boss. It's my favorite theme, and the concept is also very unique. I honestly couldn't really make an objective case for why it's the best boss in the game, because first, I don't believe that it's objectively the best fight, and second, I feel like there actually are some bosses with more dynamic and varied attacks and like movesets. This is a huge bias on my part, because I really love the whole Halloween aesthetic and the boss designs, the super diversified phases and the extra dimension of, you know, the movable platform. And yeah, I think that's why the Phantom Express is my favorite boss in Cuphead. Phantom Express, well, guys, you already know. Straight S tier. Best boss in the game for me. And now we're fighting King Dice. Actually, when my friend and I first got to King Dice, we were very surprised because we didn't think that we would actually fight him. Because we didn't think that he would be a boss, since up until this point, we only got to see him in these like small sequences in between all the Inkwell Isles as an NPC basically. So we didn't really think of him as a potential boss. And we were even more surprised when we saw how the fight was structured and designed. And let me say, this is such a great idea. To have King Dice as like the game master of the casino, making you roll a dice to decide which of his 9 mini-bosses you will be fighting, is a very cool idea. It's actually a brilliant idea. The boss stage of King Dice is super awesomely designed, and I also like the transition into the different mini-bosses, where he essentially goes into the camera and swallows it, with this swallowing sound, this sound. It's pretty cool. So, let's go through all of the mini-bosses, shall we? First mini-boss is Tipsy Troop, which are 3 drunken alcohol drinks, which is such a goofy and fun idea. You have the background being a bar or a restaurant, I can't really tell, and you can see some like creepy and monstrous looking guests appearing and disappearing. I also really like the small flying olives that the female drink spawns, and I think it's also cool that you have to take out each of the drinks individually, so it's not like just hitting one of them enough makes them all just die. So next we got Chips Bettigan. This design is very cool. It's very simple, but it's just super cool. It's basically just a stack of poker chips with like a cowboy hat, and the faces that he makes while he's attacking you and while you're fighting him are also super entertaining. He seems to be really enjoying this fight. I also like the background, where you've got, you know, some dressed up skeletons sitting at the table, which the fight takes place on. So yeah, kind of a just cool background. This is one of, if not straight up the easiest mini-boss. He doesn't have a lot of difficult or varied attacks. It's basically just him moving from one side to the next in different like chips patterns, but you can just dodge that and just keep attacking him. So yeah, Not a whole lot of challenge or anything. So, moving on, we have Mr. Wheezy. And this is one of the best. Aesthetically, it actually might be my favorite one out of the mini-bosses. I love the intro animation of King Dice's hand holding a lighter and lighting up the cigar. You know, lighting up Mr. Wheezy. And the design, man. You know, the fiery bottom and the swirly background of, I think it's people smoking. It's also just very cool to look at. He looks so much like a typical cartoon villain as well. Yeah, I just really like all of the design choices in this fight. And when he switches sides, he like turns into ash and then re-emerges out of the other ash tray. Just, yeah, it's just a great design overall. And it's a great animation as well. And the fire projectiles he shoots at you actually have a relatively challenging movement pattern, so it's also a quite challenging fight. Moving on, we have Pip and Dot. And this is another boss with an awesome design and just overall amazing aesthetic. It's essentially a domino with like two faces, so it's made up of two personalities, and it's sitting on a swing. The background of this one is especially brilliant and very pleasing to look at. You've got all the different domino blocks combined and arranged in different patterns, and this background just has a very strong sense of depth to it, because there are like multiple layers of domino combinations. Yeah, I really like it. The head is also very funny. I also like the animation when they open their mouth in the middle with, you know, the sharp teeth. Very creative. And there's also that little bird domino as well. I think that's also pretty cute. And finally, the death animation is also very good, with the bottom female face getting angry and using its legs to kick the upper male domino in the face. It's pretty fun. One thing to note, I feel like it could have been a cool idea if they made the bottom face have like 3 or 4 eyes. You know, kind of take advantage of the fact that it's a domino block, so it doesn't just have to be, you know, 2-eyed. But it's very minor, you know, could have been cool though. I think that's a pretty cool idea. So next we have the 5th mini-boss, Hocus Pocus, the Bunny Wizard. And this fight is also one of the better ones. His design is brilliant. His animations look super crazy and over the top, which is great. The background with the curtain and the playing cards and all that looks very nice. He's actually a pretty tough fight, especially the one attack when he like spawns the different card signs either at the bottom or the top of the screen that you have to parry or else you'll 100% get hit. And another great death animation with him getting choked by his own tie, which also fits the magic theme. So moving on, we've got Fear Lap, which is a skeleton horse race. To keep up the gambling theme, we're in a casino after all. This is the boss I fought the least amount of times, so I don't remember him quite as well, but it's still a very awesome boss battle. Especially like the tiny horse racers at the bottom of the screen and the background are all very cool. It's a very well executed theme, and aesthetically it's also very well done. This is also one of the like tougher fights of all the mini bosses, mainly because of these small ghost horse riders that shoot up to hit you. So you need to pay attention to these. And another great death animation with the skeleton horse holding money bills in both hands. So he's probably lost some money on the bets it's made. So, next mini boss, we have Piruletta. Now this design is absolutely fantastic. For me, it's very close between this design and Mr. Wheezy's. I really like that her tutu is a roulette wheel. This is like such a cool idea. And there's this one great spinning move where she throws all these little white roulette balls at you. There's also the 4 floating poker chips that you can temporarily stand on when parrying them. And the background with the many hands wearing gloves, making their bets and all that, is also just great. Great theme, great design, very cool mini boss. Moving on to number 8, we have Mangosteen. This guy is a floating 8-ball that has a very cursed looking face. Also pretty good idea to make this particular boss at the 8th spot, you know, that's some 500 IQ move right there. I really like the colorful and creative background, and yeah, Mangosteen's face is just very fun to watch because it just looks so ridiculous. And this one, alongside Chips Bedigan, is by far the easiest boss out of the 9. Because all the attacks and projectiles are super easy to predict and react to. There's not much of a challenge in this one, but the design is just very cool. And fittingly, this guy's also got a pretty cursed death animation, where his eyes spin like crazy, and he's vomiting up the black fluid inside himself. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. For the final mini-boss, we have Mr. Chimes. He's one of those toy monkeys holding cymbals, and he's hanging from the ceiling on a mechanical claw. So the whole fight basically takes place in one of those claw machines where you can try and get one of those toys. You can also see the toys in the background, and through the glass you can also see the other like playing machines. This fight has a very cool and unique mechanic baked into it, which is the memory card game. So you'll have to find the matching pair of cards, and only then you can attack the monkey. So only when you've found every single pair, you can actually attack the monkey. And I really like the concept and the design of the fight itself. And you know, the monkey character, he just looks very fun. And this is a very great boss. I'd say he's in my top 3, alongside Mr. Weezy and Piruletta. And just above Pit and Dot. So now we get to my boy. We get to King Dice himself, which to me personally is one of the most challenging parts of the entire game. Especially in my first playthrough, this last parry test with all the walking cards was super tough to get down. And King Dice does take a lot of hits, which makes this even harder and more stressful. My strategy to deal with this final phase was to parry as best as I could, and as soon as I could tell that I would like mess up a parry and inevitably get hit, I'd use the invincibility charm and just spam the absolute shit out of him with the red spread gun. In terms of design, the only things to note are 1, his cool hands that almost are like a character themselves, and 2, the walking cards that have these cute little eyes in the middle of where their sign is. This entire boss is super great. It's very individual. You can basically decide for yourself how many mini bosses you want to fight. I mean, you could even fight every single one if you really wanted to. Or you can strategically plan to fight only those who are easiest to you. Or you can do whatever else. And this boss basically automatically counts as one of the best bosses in the game, just because of the sheer amount of content in it. And the bosses are all very well designed, plus some great concepts and themes. The overall, King Dice theme is also very cool. And I can't really see how anyone could not like this boss, except for maybe the final phase. But even that I think is very cool, because of the big challenge it poses. King Dice? I mean, it's pretty obvious. S tier. Now, this is it guys. We get to the final boss. And this one is also one of the best fights in the entire game. The intro animation with the devil looking at Cuphead with his huge eye, and then his pupil turns into a cup getting chopped up by an axe. It's so damn cool. Again, these guys just can't resist but to use every opportunity to make something beautiful and amazing. This animation alone is just, it's so great, and the way it like turns back into his eye it's just so good. His throne room also looks absolutely sick, with the nice columns and the fiery red background and all the volcanoes in the background. And of course his red and golden throne, which also looks very cool. This first phase is very cool, and it's also pretty long. The devil uses a lot of different attacks to hit you, like the snake dragon that almost completely covers the screen, where he like extends his neck and still remains sitting on his throne. You've also got the one where he turns into a goat, which fits nicely with the devil and hell theme of course. And then there's the spider one, where he starts growing like multiple arms and throws off his head, that then slams down on the player as like a spider. I also like the design of the spider a lot, with the multiple eyes and like the spiky nose. He also does these weird spells which spawn 3 different types of projectiles with a very specific pattern to them. And you've also got these cute little purple devil minions running around and running from side to side that you can account for by them appearing in the background. The transition into the next phase is also very well done, where the devil jumps down out of his own skin and jumps down the hole as a skeleton with like horns. And then we get to the real shit. We go down the hole and there is this giant devil head with huge red burning eyes and a super wide smile. This is such a good design, and it does look very horrifying. I love it. I absolutely love it. Now, the second phase is actually easier than the first. The attacks, like the spinning axes he spawns and the parryable bat bombs that come out of his ears, are pretty manageable overall, and the phase doesn't take too long either. It's rather quick and it's not all that challenging. However, the next phase is where it gets really tough. There are a lot more projectiles to deal with, and on top of that, you've got these two fat, stupid looking devil goons that spit these skulls at you, while you have to account for the rings, these other small flying demon minions. It's really tough. And I always made sure to save my invincibility charm for this phase, because I think it's the most difficult one, without the use of any charms. And then there's the last phase, the final phase, where the devil starts like crying, which is just a great little like end to the fight. You only have one platform to stand on, and the only thing you have to focus on is shooting and not getting hit by the falling burning rings. And this is not that easy, because either you can parry one of his tears, so you have a little bit more like clearance, or you'll need to do a perfect jump off the platform and a perfect land on the platform. It needs to be perfectly timed, or else you will get hit by the rings. And that's it. Man, what a great final battle. There's a great sense of progression and scale throughout the phases, very hellish and horrifying designs, a great challenge. This is easily in the top 4 for the hardest bosses in the game for me. It's so great. The challenge is perfect for a final boss. The design is just awesome. I love that the devil is like this black fur creature almost. So much great stuff in this fight. The devil. S tier. So that's it. That's the final tier list in this exact order. Now that I'm looking at it, I might put Grim Matchstick in like, you know, A tier? Maybe, maybe not, I'm not sure. I'd have to play it again. I'd have to fight him like again multiple times to make sure. But I'm not sure. I think he'll still remain in B tier. I think this is a pretty good tier list.